did Madison and Jefferson do? They got out their pens. Jefferson writes what are called the Kentucky resolutions. Madison will write what are called, Madison, the father of the Constitution, writes the Virginia resolutions, and they're saying, they're invoking this concept known as nullification. And they're saying the states of Virginia and Kentucky are not going to be bound by the Alien and Sedition Acts. Frankly, the other states, I think there were like 15 other states at that time in 1798, they didn't like what Kentucky and Virginia did. They didn't join along with them. And they actually voiced their displeasure for what Kentucky and Virginia did. But it didn't matter. Kentucky and Virginia, their state house and state senate, and their governors signed off on this thing, and they said, we're not going to be bound by it. So the other states can do whatever they want, but you know, we're going to go our own route on this, and we're not going to be bound by the Alien and Sedition Acts. Let me give you another example of nullification. State of Wisconsin, and this goes back to the Compromise of 1850, which held off the Civil War for about 10 more years. There was a part of the Compromise of 1850 in which there is a fugitive slave law, in which slaves had to be returned. And if you came across a runaway slave, you had to detain him, you had to call the authorities, and then the authorities then would hold that runaway slave until his owner came from the south to retrieve what they considered to be their property, because that's what slaves were considered to be at that time. So the people of the state of Wisconsin didn't like this. And so they got on the members of their General Assembly, and the General Assembly of the state of Wisconsin in the early 1850s, the Wisconsin House and Wisconsin Senate, they nullified this part of the Compromise of 1850, and the governor of Wisconsin signed off on it. They said, we're not playing your game. We're not going to be bound by this part of this law, this law of 1850, Compromise of 1850, this fugitive slave law, which says that we have to retain these runaway slaves. And so Wisconsin said, the rest of the Union, you can do whatever you want, but the state of Wisconsin, we consider this to be unconstitutional, and our state General Assembly has nullified it. And so this is our contention. This is the thing that can be done with this Obamacare issue. Now, something else, and thank goodness this has not yet hit the state of Michigan, but we've been fighting this for many years, is the issue of a constitutional convention. Are all of you aware of the dangers of a constitutional convention?
It was on our ballot this November.
That's mandatory every
16 years.
Every
16.
Every 16 years,
yep.
Okay. And how did the voters they voted it down? Okay. The danger with it is a runaway convention. That's in a nutshell. And you just can't control it. You can't control it just to one issue. And even then, you know, the rules of ratification can be changed. You know, there's a whole bunch of games that can be played. So a constitutional convention, what they call a con-con, is very, very dangerous. And just recently, we have beat it back in Utah, Virginia, New Hampshire, Indiana. We're going to beat it back in Kentucky also. So we've been fighting, you know, the good fight on this issue and beating this thing back. We've been working with other groups, to be honest with you, to oppose these con-con measures. But that, you know, those are just a couple of little battles that we're involved in right now. Before I make concluding remarks, I know this gentleman back here had a question. Did the things I've said or any other miscellaneous questions you might want to ask me? Go ahead, sir.
I had a talk about 4 days ago, and I can't talk too good, but
You have a stroke and you can't talk very well.
I heard that cattle for resident cattle for relation means the same thing as the Illuminati.
Illuminati.
Not quite. The Illuminati was set up in 1776. Supposedly was broken up in Bavaria in 1784. A lot of people think that it survived. Here's the way I deal with that issue. I can't prove to you conclusively that it survived. A lot of people feel that it did. They're probably right and I'm probably wrong, to be honest with you. But if I can't prove something conclusively happened myself, I just sort of keep quiet about it. And just for purposes of simplicity myself, I like to go to the year of 1921 and just start people off with the founding of the Council on Foreign Relations in 1921. To sort of keep things simple. And they started this, keep in mind they started this because after World War I, President Woodrow Wilson essentially wanted world government. That's what his League of Nations was all about. The United States Senate, thank God, rejected our participation in this League of Nations. So, frustrated that the League of Nations did not materialize, in 1921, an individual whose name was Colonel Edward Mandel House. It was the title of Colonel was honorary. Wilson referred to Colonel House. Almost the entire 8 years Wilson was president, House lived in the White House, and he was so close to Wilson, both physically and really mentally. Wilson referred to him, the Latin term is alter ego, his other self. They were that close. But they actually had a falling out toward the end of Wilson's administration. Wilson was so adamant that the League of Nations had to be his way, and Colonel House is saying, hey, don't sweat it. He says, we'll compromise a little bit with the League of Nations. We'll make a few adjustments, a few amendments. He said, just get the darn thing passed, and then we can prostitute it and pervert it all we want once we get it passed for the administrative process.
Kind of like Obamacare.
Exactly. Yeah, we sort of have to pass it before we can find out what it's all about. Yeah. And so Colonel House said, hey, don't sweat it, compromise. But Wilson was so adamant, he said, no, it's got to be this way, and the Senate rejected it. So, but keep going. But it's essentially the same concept, though, is what you're talking about.
That's all I had on that topic. Several people they're the same thing, it's the same.
Correct.
The same group of cooks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's sort of like birds of a feather flock together. Yes.
A nullification.
Uh-huh.
I haven't read a lot about it, but some, the arguments for and against.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like, I remember quite a bit happened in the 1830s with the tariffs that the South was against, that northern states were for.
South Carolina
South
specifically.
Carolina.
Okay.
Calhoun, Clay, Henry Jackson were the players.
Especially Calhoun.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, my general fuzziness on it is that it was more or less overturned. The idea was didn't hold water, didn't fly very far.
Well, that's good that you mentioned the South Carolina situation, 1832, 1833. Trying to keep myself on the clock so I don't jabber on all night here. Before I comment on that aspect of it. Couple things that nullification are not. Okay? First of all, nullification is not secession. Although South Carolina did nullify what's called the Tariff of Abominations Act passed in 1828. The tariff was so high that the states in this country passed it. Actually, Calhoun had a little devious streak, and he at this time is Vice President of the United States. And Calhoun is saying, okay, you know what, congressmen in the South, he's saying, we're gonna lose on this issue. So we're gonna lose, let's go ahead, we'll lose big, but let's make it into a national issue. So the tariff of abominations, the tariff of 1828, is so high that they're gonna lose on it. So the South also joins in on the act and they vote for it, just to bring attention to the issue. And so Calhoun bears a role, and he's vice president
He
of the
resigned,
United States.
didn't he, right about that?
I'm sorry?
He resigned also.
Late December of 1828, yes. But they're actually gonna pass this thing. Now, the state of South Carolina, and this is one of those constitutional questions that I don't want to get into right now, but I'm convinced on South Carolina, their nullification of the tariff issue, that South Carolina was wrong and President Andrew Jackson was right, because the tariff is a constitutional issue that the Congress has a responsibility to deal with. And you know what? The South didn't like it. Now, was South Carolina wrong in nullifying it? Yes. Was Jackson, and this didn't materialize, but Jackson is saying he's going to lead what? He's going to take the U.S. Army and go down to South Carolina to stop this nonsense, because it's his job as president to see that the laws be faithfully executed, and the tariff is a constitutional law. So Jackson's saying, I'm going down to South Carolina and I'm going to put an end to this nonsense. And he also says, and I'll go down there and put an end to this nonsense. And he says, first tree I find, when I find John C. Calhoun, first tree I find, I'll hang him. Jackson said his two biggest regrets in life were that he didn't hang Calhoun and shoot Henry Clay. So this is the kind of guy you're dealing with. But South Carolina did engage in nullification, which I think was wrong. Something else, though, that South Carolina is playing with, and they'll be the first state to do this in December of 1860, they're playing with the idea of secession, leaving the Union. That's an entirely different issue. But nullification is not secession. Something else that nullification, this is not nullification. June of 1963, Montgomery, Alabama. Governor George Wallace standing in the doorway at the University of Alabama. He refused to let the two black students enter. Some people will say, we had a state senator from Indiana who was in favor, who was going to introduce a nullification bill in the Indiana State Senate several months ago. Then he backed off. And he said, no, he says, I'm fearing that if we do this, federal marshals are going to be sent to the state of Indiana. And I haven't talked to this is a younger state senator, a guy in his early 30s. I haven't talked to him yet. But I think what he was thinking was this episode with Wallace, Governor Wallace, in June of 1963. But it's apples and oranges, okay? The Alabama General Assembly in no way engaged in nullification of some kind of a federal law ordering Governor Wallace to stand in the doorway like that. So it's apples and oranges. Those are things that nullification is not. Yes, go ahead.
Did you say you thought the president was supposed to uphold the laws of the United States?
Yes. Now what?
Even DOMA?
I'm sorry.
Even DOMA?
DOMA.
Defense of Marriage
Defense
Act.
of Marriage Act?
Okay. Well, that's not. Okay. Is that? Okay. Let's go at it from this point of view. Something like that, is that a law that the federal government gets involved in at the constitutional level? The answer to that, I think, is no, and then it falls under the umbrella of the state government. So that would be up to the states. But the federal government actually has no authority in something like that.
But they're always on the books.
At the state level, then the state of
There's a
Michigan.
federal- No, there's a federal